So have you ever wondered how you can integrate a customer chatbot into your website? In this video here, we're going to cover the whole pipeline, how you can build the backend, how you can use large language models to create a chatbot around your website. So say that your customers are going to your website, they are asking questions and so on. Then you can just have API calls going to the GPT-4 model. You can even set up a RAG-based system and so on. But in this video here, we're going to cover how you can set up the backend and also a simple front end. So we have this chatbot. Then you can integrate the exact same thing into your website. So when the customers go to your website, they go inside the chatbot, you can just connect that to our large language model and it can explain and also answer a ton of questions for your customers. You can also add additional documents to it and so on if you're building a RAG-based system on top of it. But if you're just using the large language model, you get a very long way instead of just the traditional chatbots and so on, which are not good. It's Nicola from Verpex. Let's get into it. So let's just jump straight into the code and see what we need to be able to create this customer chatbot directly with the backend. We also have the front end with a chatbot interface and how the whole system works. So this is pretty much how ChatGPT and all of those different platforms are working under the hood. So we need a backend. We need to have our API calls set up. So once we actually have a chat message, a question, or whatever the customer wants to have explained, it will then send a request to the GPT-4 model from OpenAI. We'll get the response back, and then we can send that out to the customers. So what we need to start with here, again, there's tons of different interfaces and so on that you can work with. But in this video, we're going to set up the API or like the backend with a Flask application. So you can basically just do that. You will get an endpoint that you can call with the questions and you'll get the response back. So this Flask backend here, or whatever tool and platform that you're using, you can basically integrate that directly into your website. It's just an API call that you need to do. So that's why we're creating it with Flask. And on top of the Flask application, we're going to build an interface with Streamlit. So everything is in Python here, fairly easy to get started with. It's just a few lines of code, and then we utilize these frameworks. We have our Streamlit application, which can run a chatbot. You can have your own front end or basically just integrate it directly into the backend for your website when you're hosting it. So yeah, let's just jump straight into the code. We have our website chatbot, and then we also have the website chatbot app. So to start with, we need to set up OpenAI because we're going to use the new GPT-4o model, send the request there, and we'll get the responses back. But you can pretty much use whatever large language model available out there. I'm just going to show you how we can do it with OpenAI. So to start with here, from OpenAI, we're going to import OpenAI. You just need to pip install that in your environment. Then we can set up a client with the OpenAI. So we just create an instance for our client. We need to specify our API key, and we're pretty much good to go. We can now send API calls, requests to the OpenAI servers. Then we're going to import Flask requests and also JSON file. We're going to do some locking and trace back along in our code as well, just to make sure that our backend and our whole API is running as expected. So now we create an instance of our Flask application with the name, and we also set up our locker with the basic configuration. So first of all here, we need to set up some system messages. We can always append to that, but this is how you can prompt your own customer service chatbot. So if your specific platform could be that you're selling a bunch of different products, could also be services that you're providing. If you have an FAQ, you can attach it here to the content system messages as well. And then it's going to take all of that, the information from your specific company and your customer service, throw it into the ChatGPT model and also get a response back based on that. So first of all, we set up our role as the system, and we then throw in the content. So you're a helpful customer service assistant for a web hosting platform. Provide concise and accurate information about our services, pricing, and also common issues. So you can pretty much just throw everything in here. It's just going to append that in the front when it's going to throw the request to the OpenAI API. Then we can also set up our conversation history. So our chatbot inside our website for our customer service will also have memory. So once we have sent the request, it will basically just store all the messages in this conversation history. Now we need to set up a function to get our chatbot response. So right now from our front end, we're going to have a user input. So that's going to be a text string inside our chatbot interface, just as when you're typing something into ChatGPT, we get the string. Then we need to throw that into here. So first of all, we just append the content, so the user input to our conversation history. So we make sure that we keep track of that. Then we can go in and basically just generate a response. So from our client, our OpenAI client, we can call chat.completions.create. And now we can go and specify which of the models we want to use from OpenAI. In this video, we're going to use GPT-4. You can also go in and specify GPT 3.5 and so on. All different types of large language models, so Llama, Claude, and all of those guys. You just need to set up their specific classes then. So that's pretty much it. We can set our messages here equal to our conversation history. So every time we generate a response, we're going to take the whole history and also the new user input and throw it into the chat together with our system message up here, where it says that it should be a helpful customer service assistant for a web hosting platform. Then we can just return that. So conversation history, the response that we get back as well, we append that to our conversation history. So we just keep track of input and also the output. Then we can return from this function the assistant reply, which we can then show inside of our Streamlit interface. If we're not able to get a response back, we just log it with an error. So error in the get chatbot response, and then we'll print the string or the exception for that. So that's the main function we need to use to call the OpenAI API. Then we're going to set up the root for our app. So we just get a URL that we can send a request to and also get a response back. So the method here that we're going to use is a post method. Then we have our chat function. So first of all here, we take our Streamlit interface, we take our front end, we connect it to our backend. From our JSON response or the request that we get to this API, we just extract the message from that, and that will be our user input from the front end. And then we can log the information or the message that we have received. So it could be explaining different parts of your platform, services and products, but could also be specific questions. So we log the receive message, and then we throw the user input into our get chatbot response function. We get the response back. If we don't get any back, we're just returning that an error occurred while processing your request. And this is most likely that your backend is not set up in the correct way, or you have not specified your OpenAPI key or something like that. Then we also log the response we're sending back, so the output from our OpenAI API. We return the JSON-fied response, and then we're pretty much good to go. We can build a front end around this very simple Flask backend, and we're pretty much good to go. We can set up the port for a Flask application, and we can just call that, send requests to that, get responses back, and we're good to go. So now we have our backend. We can see it's only around 50 lines of code, very easy, and you can use this directly in your own platforms for your own websites, creating this chatbot here around it. So that's pretty much it. So the front end here could be a bit different compared to your platform, depending on your services, products, what you're doing, what type of interface and so on you're using, and also the hosting. But in this video here, we're just going to do a very simple interface with Python because they have a chatbot and so on, but most websites, they already have that integrated directly. And then you can just use the backend with the OpenAI API. So import Streamlit, request and JSON. And again, you just need to pip install all of these to work in your environment. Then we set up the first part of our Streamlit interface. So we just have a page title, which is a web hosting chatbot. We have a title and we also have a caption, so you can customize that for your own specific needs. And then we have our messages here. So if our messages is not available in this st.session state, it's basically just going to apply that. So the meaning here with our session state is that every time we do something in our Streamlit interface, it's going to rerun the whole Python program. So we need to store these variables, every single variable that we don't need to reset. Every time it reruns it, we need to store it in the session state. So this is how you can do it, and then you can just access the message later on from your st.session state. So that's pretty much it here. First of all, we just append this first message. So once you go inside the website, it's going to open up the chatbot and basically just give you this message to start with. Welcome, how can I assist you with your web hosting services today? Now we can then create a function to send a message. So we set up the URL here. Right now it's just on my local host. So this is the port from our Flask backend that we just set up in the other code file. And then we have this chat where it is rooted. So now we can set up our headers, our data, and then we just dump the message into our JSON file. So we have our data that we can send a request to our API, and then we'll get the response back. So from request, we're going to do a post request. We throw in the URL, the headers, our data, and also a timeout in case that we're not getting a response back. So then we should get a response back here. We can raise for status, basically just to check if we got a response, if it's failing, or what type of error we are getting. So it's going to return the response here in the JSON format, and if it's not able to process it, it's just going to throw out, sorry, I could not process your request, please try again. And also if there's any communication error and so on, if it's raising an error, here in the exception, it's just going to return the exact same thing here, and that it has an error communicating with the server, which is the Flask backend application. So right now we can then just go through our messages in our system state. So everything would basically just be appended later on. So inside our messages, we will have our role. So that could be the system and also the user, so the chat assistant. Then we can create a markdown here, which is basically just going to show all the messages that we have in our session state. So every time we chat with it, once we append it to the history, the session state history, it's basically just going to keep showing you all of that inside the interface. So then we can set up our chat input, which will basically just be our prompt, as you know from ChatGPT. So ask about our web hosting services. This will be the chat input. Then you can then throw in a prompt and it's going to process that. So once you have typed in a prompt into the chatbot, it's just going to append that with the user role. And we also have our system role, which is our assistant. It's going to append those messages to the system state. We create a markdown with the prompt that we have typed in. We then take our prompt, send a message with it. So it's going to call this function up here at the top. It takes the message, throws it into a JSON format, sends a request to the URL, it gets the response back, and we can then show that inside the interface. So yeah, we get the response back, and then we can just visualize the response directly inside our chatbot, append the messages to our session state, so we just keep on memorizing what we have talked with the customer about. So this is pretty much it. We have 50 lines in our backend, we have 50 lines in our front end, even with a lot of spaces. So this is pretty simple to get up and running compared to some of the traditional chatbots, and this is significantly better, even if you provide your own guidance inside the backend. So basically for your specific products, services, if you have some details and so on that you want to include in the responses in general. Could also just be a whole FAQ that you throw into it as well. So that's pretty much it here. Let's now go in and run it. I'm going to open up a terminal. There we go. And first of all, we need to run our backend. So we have our website, chatbot.py. So then it's going to open this up on the local host. So we can see that it's running now here. And we should be able to go in and send requests to it. So now we have a backend service up and running. We can then go in, open a new terminal and run our web application. So basically when we're using Streamlit, we need to call Streamlit run and then our website chatbot app. There we go. And then we have our app. Then we're going to run this Python file. It's going to open up our web application here on the local host. So I'm going to pull that up now. First of all, here we can basically just see the assistant. Welcome, how can I assist you today with your web hosting services? We just minimize that, but right now we're just visualizing it in here. It doesn't really matter, it's just for visualization purposes. You can delete it inside the code. So welcome, how can I assist you with your web hosting services today? I'm just going to ask it, what is web hosting? There we go, let's see if it works. So what is web hosting? It's going to send the request to the URL or a Flask application and get the response back. So this is the output from our ChatGPT-4 model or the GPT-4 model. You can use whatever large language model that you want to use. In here, we can also go in and set it in different settings. So you can have light mode, dark mode, and so on. So if you're using Python to build interfaces, this is a really cool tool. What is web hosting? Web hosting is a service provided by companies, the web host, that sell or lease space on a server where you can store files that make your website accessible on the internet. So that could, for example, be a customer service chatbot integrated together with a large language model. So that's pretty much it. This is how you can integrate a customer service chatbot directly into your website. So then you can use it on your own when you're doing your website hosting. So definitely go and check the other videos here out on the channel. We pretty much cover everything within the web hosting space and also getting into AI stuff now, how you can use AI in web hosting and web applications in general. Thanks a lot for watching. This was Nemo Live from Verpex, and I'll just see you guys in one of the upcoming videos. Until then, happy learning.